Well, people, Geert Wilders has now released his movie Fitna, and by all accounts it is as anti-Islamic as people thought it was going to be. So I have to stand by what I said a couple of weeks ago on the subject, in that I believe, or in my opinion, Muslims have every right in the world to be upset by this, and not only to be upset by this, but also to stand up and express this. They have every right in the world to tell people how they feel about this movie, how it misrepresents Islam in their opinion, and how insulting the movie is to Islam and to the Prophet. That is understood. I also pointed out, and maybe I want to clarify this now a little bit, that in the balance of things, Muslims should, no matter how insulting Geert Wilders' video is and how upset they are by it, they should still be glad that these laws of freedom of expression exist, because in the end it is that same law that allows them to express their identity as Muslims and to stand up and speak out against this movie by Geert Wilders. So if you look at the two sides of the balance, it actually comes down pretty much in favor of Muslims, even though they have to put up with such despicable movies like Fitna. But they have the right to then stand up and speak out against it. And there are so many more Muslims than there are Geert Wilders, so if they do this right, if they organize themselves well enough, they can make themselves heard, and make themselves heard better than Geert Wilders possibly could. But they have to do this within the framework of the law, of course. And that might be quite frustrating, because in the end they will not be able to shut Mr. Wilders up. And that is not the point of the exercise. The point of the exercise is to show how wrong Mr. Wilders is. And if they understand that, then they will start celebrating, I would think so anyway, they would start celebrating this freedom of expression that we all hold so dear. And I think ultimately, therefore, it is in their own interest to support it. So, having said that, some people who watched my video on the subject pointed out something that I have to agree is quite blatant. And it's a level of hypocrisy that seems to exist within our Western society. And he illustrated this very clearly by showing an example of a French journalist interviewing a Muslim and later on an artist, an actor who portrayed a Jew in a very negative light. When it came to the Muslim, he was telling the Muslim basically that he should put up and shut up and accept that there is freedom of expression in France, and that therefore the Muslim should accept that people would be insulting the Prophet, for example. But on the other hand, when the actor who displayed a Jew in such a negative light came on the show, he was berating him for doing so and bringing up things like the Holocaust. And pretty much, in not so many words, telling the actor that he shouldn't be allowed to do this. Now that is obviously hypocritical. You know, if we are going to have freedom of expression, we should have freedom of expression in all realms, and that would include not just doing things that are offensive to Muslims, but also things that might be offensive to Jews or any other group. As long as we always accept that the representatives of those groups can then return the favor and express how they feel about it, debunk what was being said about them, and highlight how absurd it is. That should be the balance that's been struck. Also, we have to be, as a society, when we give people such rights, freedom of expression, which we all should and do hold very, very dear, we should also take on the responsibility to respond to those who abuse that freedom in order to spout things that are morally reprehensible and unpalatable. So, like for example, Holocaust deniers. We should not silence them, we should allow them to speak, but we should make sure as a society that when they speak, we speak out against them and show them how absurd their notions about Holocaust denial are, and so on and so forth. Which does bring me back then to the whole argument that was being put forward of anti-Semitism versus Islamophobia. There are 2 points there that I think are important. First of all, the level of insult that's being leveled at people is undeniably different. Now, a Muslim will find this hard to understand, but if we Westerners look at a picture of Muhammad with a bomb for a turban, for example, that does not really affect us at all. Whether we find it funny or not, even if we don't find it funny, and most of us don't find that particularly funny, a cartoon like that, it doesn't strike us as particularly offensive either. It's just an absurd little cartoon. But if somebody pokes fun at somebody who has suffered in a concentration camp, that is, to our ears and eyes, a very different matter, because our nations have lived through this, especially in Europe. They have lived through this ordeal of the Second World War. So emotionally, to us, it hits home harder than an insult leveled at the Prophet of Islam. That is a fact of life. There's not much you can do about that. So Muslims have to understand that we therefore emotionally will respond somewhat differently to insults and jokes leveled at Holocaust victims or Jews and Muslims, rightly or wrongly. And it is hypocritical. Certainly the response of that journalist to those 2 different situations was hypocritical in nature. The other thing that was brought up was something about laws against anti-Semitism. Now we need to be very careful there, because I don't think that is entirely true. I don't think there are laws that outlaw anti-Semitism per se, in the sense that they would outlaw insults leveled at Jews, for example. And a clear illustration of that is the actor in that very same clip. Even though the journalist laid into him and really read him the riot act, in the end the actor was under no circumstances prevented from acting out that role. He is legally entitled to do so, even though it does meet with a lot of disapproval, but it's not legally forbidden to him. So laws against anti-Semitism aren't about insulting Jews. What are they about? I would imagine that they are about incitement to hatred, violence, exclusion, and such matters. Now, I don't expect that those laws would be specifically geared to anti-Semitism. I would say those laws would probably be geared very much to any sort of incitement to hatred against any sort of group, incitement to have people excluded from society or parts of society, and so on and so forth. So I don't think those laws are especially leveled against anti-Semitism, although, of course, due to our emotional reaction to it, in case of anti-Semitism, we might be inclined to respond quicker to when something like that threatens to go in that direction. But I would expect that Muslims and Jews are equally protected by law against the real problems, incitement to hatred, violence, and so on. I don't think there is a real discrepancy here, nor anything that needs to be addressed in law. And like I said, freedom of speech is important. And remember, we always should take the responsibility that when we let somebody speak and their message is unpalatable, we should address that message. Not to shut them up, but to expose them. Thank you.